Welcome to Crescent City Crime, dear listeners. I'm Tracy,
And I'm Brian.
and we do apologize for getting this episode out a little bit late. Just because y'all don't know, I do have a real world job, and right now we're in the thick of carnival season, and this last week took more out of me than I anticipated.
Yeah, and the move and uh, taking care of little things that were left over involving the move just took quite a bit out of me too.
Yes, and we are still living amongst boxes of chaos, unpacking chaos right now.
Yep,
Yes.
keeping us quite busy.
Very much so. And we also ask that you bear with us for just one more hiatus. Let me get through Mardi Gras because my job does involve being in the middle of the French Quarter during Mardi Gras. So, just so you know, even though we're releasing this episode on Sunday, our next episode is going to be on March the 2nd.
Yep, it doesn't get any busier for service industry people than the French Quarter week of Mardi Gras.
That is so true. However, dear listeners, if you want to help save me from this particular life, if you guys would be so kind as to tell your friends and
Tell your enemies, especially your enemies.
about this podcast and, get us some more listeners and, maybe the income from this podcast could be raised enough to where I could just make this my full-time job. That would be so awesome.
That would be quite the dream.
It really would be. But, we do want to thank you all for listening to us and for spending time with us every week. We so appreciate that you make us part of your lives.
We really enjoy having you with us.
Of course, always ratings and reviews on your preferred podcasting platform are appreciated. And if you're not subscribed to us, why the heck aren't you? It costs you nothing to press that button and make sure that you're subscribed to us so you're not missing any episodes. And of course, we are on YouTube. And Brian, I wanted to start something kind of new, wherein every episode we talk a little bit about current events. As you know, I've been obsessively following the University of Idaho killings, and I was impressed that the law enforcement caught the person so quickly.
Yes, that was that was a very challenging case.
Yes, and I've watched a few of my favorites YouTube true crime people who have done deep dives into it, and they explained how they caught Brian Kohlenberger, who is a criminal justice major. He was getting a PhD in criminal justice, and his motive was that he wanted to see how people would react.
I have a criminal justice degree too. My name's also Brian, and
But your last name is not Kohlenberger.
yes, fortunately,
and
not.
you're definitely not in jail
Someone
right now.
else who's disgraced my name. Besides that, there was the gentleman, or if you call him that, who ran over Stephen King with my same first and last name.
Oh yes, yeah, and you did when you were younger. You looked like Timothy McVeigh, so there's that too.
Yeah, and even worse, I was still serving in the reserve shot of the Marine Corps at the time. So yes, I had the haircut, and at the time I was working at the blood bank, doing logistics work, and I was teased about that. People were calling me McVeigh, and I didn't find it to be very funny at the time, because of course I was at the time I was fearing, certain things changing in response to that. So I didn't appreciate being confused with a white supremacist terrorist.
Right.
Even though he also served in Desert Storm.
Well, anyways, this the Brian that is not you. His motive for committing that crime was that he wanted to see how people would react. You believe that?
That's a typical psychopath.
I mean, he killed 4 people viciously in their beds.
Psychopaths enjoy getting attention. Even if whether people know who they are or not, they love to see the media coverage of their crimes. They feed off of it. They truly enjoy it.
I wonder if there's going to be a trial or if he's just going to plead guilty. If he enjoys attention, he might want a trial.
He's probably going to insist on going to trial because he's going to get. That's how he's going to get what he wants. Now he's going to try to gain some type of notoriety, and in all this, there's probably going to be at least one copycat who's of the same mindset, enjoys the same type of perverted, twisted, evil activity.
God, I hope you're wrong about that. I really, really do.
Yeah, I wish I was. Yeah, I wish I was wrong. We just see this stuff repeated.
We do.
And I'm not a fan of communist China, but one thing they do right is they
don't glorify their criminals.
No, they don't. They keep them. They hide their identities from the public. The identities of these high profile criminals from the public.
Right. I wonder if we're the only country in the world that has like court TV and criminal cases, because I know that there's different laws in different countries, so they don't have a lot of these things are not sensationalized in other countries, but we do it here as a national pastime.
Yeah, we sensationalize quite a few things.
Yes. Which also leads me into something else that I was recently looking at about how true crime aficionados and podcasters and TikTokers and YouTubers are kind of getting into this debate of ethics. And I feel like that's an important thing to bring up right now, especially since I was talking to you earlier about that TikTok alleged psychic who was trying to blame the murder of these Idaho students on a professor at the University of Idaho. So now this TikToker is getting sued. So, dear listeners, please rest assured that we here on this podcast are going to do our absolute best to not wrongly identify anybody. What I like to do is I like to wait for all the facts to come out. I like to wait until an arrest has been made before I really even say anything.
Yeah, that's very prudent, because otherwise, theoretically, you could interfere with an investigation.
You could, and you could also have, one of the people, the survivor in the house that those students were murdered in, okay, that surviving roommate had a lot of people piling onto her online saying, well, why didn't you stop the killer? Why didn't you call the police right away? La-di-da. Well, for one thing, if somebody's in your house killing other people, would you go try to stop them? Would it be that easy? Probably not. And second of all, that roommate didn't even really know what was going on. She heard noises. She wasn't even sure what was happening.
Oh, she may have been killed too. Had she tried to investigate or even tried to stop him? One cannot assume that, let's say, random people you hear about in the news, random because I say random because you don't know these people, have the same capabilities as you. Okay, just like would I expect her to be able to get out of bed and do the Marine Corps confidence course?
No, probably not. No.
Jump out of bed and do that, or jump out of the bed and perform a Marine Corps PFT, or jump out of bed and put on her gear and deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan, for example, without any training. Okay, people need to be realistic. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Be realistic.
Okay. Now let's say someone like me had been there. Okay. Yes, I would have picked up a pistol and I would have checked to see if everything was okay. And stranger with a weapon in his hand.
Goes bye-bye.
Yeah, if you're not retreating from me when you see me point the pistol at you, I'm going to go ahead and fire. If you turn around and run, then I'm not going to fire at you. Okay, even if you're inside the house. But that part is just me. Okay, and of course it depends on the laws in your state. State of Louisiana, for example, probably state of Texas, Mississippi as well.
Oh, Texas, definitely.
Yeah. If an intruder is in your house, you don't have to warn them. You don't have to give them a chance to retreat. You can just light them up.
Yes.
But
also, I don't think those students had weapons.
Very, very, very unlikely. So, your response to that type of thing is going to depend upon your capabilities. Okay. Keep in mind, the Constitution of the United States of America does not require you to defend yourself. Okay. Mm-hmm. Or even defend others. But it does, in theory, give you the capability to do so legally. Without being prosecuted. At least that's the theory. Of course, all this stuff gets tested in court periodically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so once again, ridiculous to just expect the victim of a crime to be able to respond the exact same way as you would, and unless you've already been in a similar situation, demonstrated similar capability, you don't know how you're going to react.
Yeah.
In that situation.
Yeah, I would hope that at the very least, my instinct would be to call the police. At the very least.
Yes.
But, that's just what I can hope for. I've not been in that situation. I really hope I never am. But, dear listeners, when things like this do happen, and it's so high profile, and everybody's just breathlessly following it and posting things, just wait. Just sit back and wait. Just wait for the rest to happen. Wait for something to happen. Don't go blaming survivors either.
Yeah, or blaming victims.
Yes.
But of course, I'll always think before you post something.
Yes, always. And that I think I mentioned that TikToker is getting sued by that professor. So don't post things without having facts.
Yeah, it's public defamation.
Yes, very much so. You can't go doing that.
Now, keep in mind, it's one thing to say to complain online about professors supposedly, brainwashing your daughter, your cousin, or your sister, or whoever it is when they go to college, okay, with a certain alleged indoctrination. Okay, it's one thing to say that. That's an opinion, okay, but if you say someone, a professor at college, is guilty of a murder and you don't have any real basis for this other than the fact that they were on the campus, pretty much,
well, I think
that's public defamation.
Well, I think that this alleged psychic was, I think she was trying to make connections where there were no connections. And I don't even want to say her name because she's ridiculous and I'm not giving her any more publicity. But when I did look at a video that broke down what she had done and what she had said, and it was just like, what are you even talking about? Like, her website says that she uses like left and right brain thinking for her psychic abilities and all this just dribble, this malarkey. And it's like,
in the end, she's another basement troll.
Yes, she is another basement troll.
Except
she's a grifter. She's a con artist.
This is worse. Except this is worse. This is not someone who profits by watching videos and clicks because she decides to tear up elements of pop culture.
Right.
Okay. Or say false things about things she knows to be false about upcoming movies and then says that it's just a rumor. This is far worse. This is saying This is saying someone has committed a murder without any real basis for it whatsoever.
Yes, and it can be so hard to come back from that too, even if it's not true. Your name is always going to be associated with that thing. Like people Google you, and guess what? It's going to come up.
Yeah, it's nothing you want to be known for.
Yeah, so don't. Yeah, you really nobody should go messing with other people's lives like that. If they've actually done something, that's one thing. But this is why you should sit back and wait. Wait for an arrest to be made. Wait for information to come out. Rumors and theories and speculation don't really help anything.
No, and that also, and on a side note, as far as her being a psychic goes, that's very discrediting.
Yeah.
Against her, to say the least, and it shows how desperate she was, grasping at straws, trying to gain notoriety. I mean, it's really disgusting to try to gain notoriety by at the expense of someone else who didn't even do anything wrong.
Yes. Yes. So please, dear listeners, be better than that.
Yes, don't be a bottom feeding basement troll.
Yes, please. And yeah, be better than that and don't blame survivors ever.
Exactly.
So now that that is off my chest, because I really just had to say something about that, are you ready to get into the episode proper?
Ready.
Today we're talking about Bonnie and Clyde.
Oh, yes.
Yes, Bonnie and Clyde, who were known at now this period of time, which is the Depression era. Again, I just want everybody to think about how much it must have sucked. Okay, you were dirt poor. You had food insecurity almost every day. All right, money was very hard to come by. You didn't have people were out of work.
Yeah, work was hard to come by too.
Yes, everything was hard to come by. And this period of time, this was when newspapers were such a big deal. And this was something that was followed in the newspapers. And I can imagine if you lived in that period of time, this was probably a very exciting thing to read about and to talk about. This is what might have been the most exciting thing in some people's lives, honestly.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Very, definitely more exciting than reality TV.
Which he didn't even have. He didn't even have television really back then.
No. Look, you did have really, really good radio shows, though.
Yes, you did. You did have good radio shows.
And this was likely every bit as exciting as one of those radio shows.
Except this was real. This wasn't fiction.
Yeah.
This wasn't a radio serial play,
And this was on top of the organized crime that derived largely from prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
Something we obviously haven't learned from, but that's a different discussion.
Well, and one day we will be having that discussion on this podcast. Don't you worry.
Yeah.
So this Depression era, though, is occasionally referred to as the Public Enemy era, which I really like that title, the Public Enemy era, right? This is when these types of people were just blown up to be larger than life. And Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born on October the 1st of 1910, and Clyde Chestnut Champion Barrow was born on March the 24th of 1909. They were an American criminal couple who traveled to central United States with their gang during the Great Depression. They robbed banks, stores, and funeral homes.
Funeral
homes, yeah. And, their crimes played out in the press. And between 1931 and 1934, it is believed that they murdered at least 9 law enforcement officers and 4 civilians. Now, Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born in 1910 in Rowena, Texas. She was the second of 3 children, and her father Charles Robert Parker was a bricklayer who died when Bonnie was just 4 years old. After the loss of her father, her mother Emma moved her family back to her parents' home in Cement City, an industrial suburb in West Dallas, where she worked as a seamstress. In her second year of high school, Bonnie met Roy Thornton. The couple dropped out of school and married on September 25th, 1926, 6 days before Bonnie's 16th birthday, which something else that was also common in this era was teenagers getting married at a very young age.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah, a lot more prevalent then. And during the Great Depression, this was a matter of necessity.
Yes, it often was a matter of necessity because you were hoping for money, a little bit of a better life, anything.
And it was of course difficult to support your kids.
That too, yes.
Yeah.
So the marriage was short. Roy was frequently absent and he had encounters with the law. They never officially divorced, but their paths never crossed again after January of 1929. Bonnie Parker was still wearing the wedding ring that Thornton had given her when she died, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. Thornton was in prison when he heard of her death, and he said, "I'm glad they jumped out like they did. It's much better than being caught." He was sentenced to 5 years for robbery in 1933, and after attempting several prison breaks, he was killed while trying to escape from Huntsville State Prison on October the 3rd of 1937.
Wow.
Okay, so that was her Bonnie Parker's husband, okay? Now, after she left Roy, Bonnie moved back in with her mother and worked as a waitress. One of her regular customers was a postal worker named Ted Hinton. And in 1932, he joined the Dallas County Sheriff's Department, and he was a member of the posse that killed Bonnie and Clyde.
Wow.
Now, as an adult, Bonnie wrote poems such as The Story of Suicide Sal and The Trail's End, and that poem became more commonly known as The Story of Bonnie and Clyde. She briefly kept a diary in 1929 when she was 18. She wrote of being lonely, her impatience with life in Dallas, but she also had a love of photography. Clyde Barrow was born in 1909 into a poor farming family in Ellis County, Texas, southeast of Dallas. He was the fifth of 7 children, and his parents were Henry Basil Barrow and Kumi Talitha Walker. The family moved to Dallas in the early 1920s. The Barrows spent their first months in Dallas living under a wagon.
Wow.
Until they got enough money to buy a tent. Again, just very hard times.
Yes, my grandmother grew up during those times, and quite frankly, it had the lasting effect it had on her was, stuff that my sister and I were unable to read when we were kids, but as adults we figured out the reasons why she enjoyed shopping at supermarkets so much was because she was still fearing hunger. And also the reason why she liked to take my sister and I to buffets as often as she could. And she'd tell us to eat up and get her money's worth. It was that fear of starvation that never left her. And also the reason why, like say, for example, if I eat a plate of red beans and rice or a bowl of red beans and rice or jambalaya to this day, whether it was my grandmother's when I was a kid or even anybody's now, I'm eating it to the last grain of rice.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
because
you do that.
My grandmother imparted that upon me to eat everything on the plate and be grateful for it. Because when she was my same age then, it was just so hard to come by.
Right. Well, Clyde Barrow was first arrested in 1926 at the age of 17. Police were confronting him over a rental car that he had failed to return on time. Yeah. His second arrest was with his brother Buck, and this was for possession of stolen turkeys.
Wow.
Which, again, you go back to this era. I'm not trying to say, this is that it's okay to steal, but they were probably trying to get those turkeys to feed their family. Just making a point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Clyde did have some legitimate jobs during 1927 through 1929, but he also cracked safes, robbed stores, and stole cars. In January of 1930, Bonnie and Clyde met. They met at a friend's house. She was making hot chocolate in the kitchen.
Isn't that sweet?
Isn't that sweet? They had a meet cute over hot chocolate. Yes, they did. And they were instantly smitten with each other. She was 19 and he was 20. And they spent much time together during the following weeks until Clyde was arrested and convicted of auto theft. And that is where we're going to leave the story for the moment and take this quick break. Now, after Clyde's conviction, he was sent to Eastham Prison Farm in April of 1930. He did escape after his incarceration using a weapon that Bonnie had smuggled to him. He was recaptured and sent back to prison, and he was repeatedly sexually assaulted while in prison, and he retaliated by attacking and killing his tormentor with a pipe and crushing his skull. He got another inmate who was already serving a life sentence to claim responsibility.
Ah, wow. Quite the charmer there.
This was Clyde Barrow's first murder, and in order to avoid hard labor in the fields, he purposely had 2 of his toes chopped off. This was in January of 1932.
Wow. Very, very intense.
Yes,
as well.
A very intense individual. I also want to point out here that, during this era, the language around sexual assault is not anywhere what it was today. And the trauma that Clyde carried through the rest of his life with this must have been pretty deep. Because I really don't think that people ever thought it could happen to men in that era.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So his mother had been working on getting him released, which he did not know. He did not know this. I mean, he had his toes cut off. His mother petitioned for his release successfully, and he was paroled on February the 2nd of 1932. And even though he was out of prison, people who knew him noticed changes in his behavior. His sister Marie said something awful sure must have happened to him in prison because he wasn't the same person when he got out. And a fellow inmate named Ralph Foltz said that he watched Clyde change from a schoolboy to a rattlesnake.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You send a sociopath to school, and they actually become more dangerous. Educated sociopaths can be very dangerous people.
You are correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
After his release, he continued his robbing spree, grocery stores and gas stations at a high rate, and he was often joined by Ralph Foltz. His favorite weapon was the M1918 Browning automatic rifle, or the BAR. According to the biographer John Neal Phillips, Clyde Barrow's goal in life was not to gain fame or fortune, but it was to seek revenge against the Texas prison system for the abuses that he had sustained while serving time.
Mm-hmm. Well, that BAR, by the way, Browning automatic weapon, 30-06. That's a deer hunting caliber, capable of penetrating anything law enforcement had, used for cover back then.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why he liked it. Okay. And it was one of 3 of them they had that was stolen from the Missouri State National Guard Armory.
Yes. Yeah. That is exactly what happened. And in fact, his goal, so when he was stealing the firearms, he wanted to have enough firepower to launch a raid against the Eastham prison.
Which it appears they had that in the car when they had been when they were finally shot down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
This they had 3 of those in the car with 100 20-round magazines ready to go, plus 3,000 rounds of assorted ammunition and a bunch of other guns. Yeah. More on
So,
that later.
yes, more on that later. Bonnie did join them in these robberies as well. Bonnie, on April the 19th, Bonnie Parker and Ralph Foltz were captured in a failed hardware store burglary where they were trying to steal firearms. A grand jury failed to indict Bonnie and she was released, but Ralph Foltz would be convicted and he did serve time.
Now, keep in mind, hardware stores back then did sell, for example, Thompson machine guns.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this was before the NFA, the National Firearms Act, that regulating registering machine guns. Okay, but ironically, the biggest reason why, like, gangsters at the time, just they didn't go to hardware stores to buy these Thompsons was they were very expensive, so it was cheaper to either break into National Guard armories, for example, or even these, even these hardware stores, or even purchase these military firearms illegally,
Right.
from members of the National Guard who were breaking the law at the time.
Just 2 weeks later, Clyde Barrow was the getaway driver in a robbery in Hillsborough, during which a store owner named J.N. Butcher was shot and killed. His wife identified Barrow from police photographs. On August the 5th, Clyde Barrow, Raymond Hamilton, and Ross Dyer were drinking moonshine at a country dance in Strington, Oklahoma, when Sheriff C.G. Maxwell and Deputy Eugene C. Moore approached them in the parking lot. Barrow and Hamilton opened fire, which killed Moore and gravely wounded Maxwell. And Moore was the first law enforcement officer that Clyde Barrow and his gang killed.
They had what a total of like 5 shootouts of law enforcement.
At least, yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. They lived a very fast life. In fact, when you say live fast, die young, you know that saying?
Yeah.
This is a perfect example of living fast and dying young.
It definitely is. And, some people, probably based upon what they see in movies or video games, might think, over 5 shootouts of law enforcement. That's a big deal, okay? Because most criminals, when they get into a shootout with law enforcement, it's their first and last.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. You generally don't win when you shoot it out with law enforcement.
Yes.
But apparently they had won a few times.
Yeah.
Which is part of their folk hero lore.
Right. But these people were not Robin Hood. So.
No. But people still romanticized their stories.
And they don't do that. Nobody do that. That's a bad idea.
Yeah, their stories are interesting, but they're not to really be admired.
And you remember that thing that happened last year where that was she a prison or the law enforcement officer?
Yeah, she was a
convict.
She was a corrections officer.
Yeah, that's something. This is something that actually reminded me of that when I was going through the information for Bonnie and Clyde. I was like, kind of like that.
Yeah. Bad news.
Bad news, yes. W.D. Jones had been a friend of Barrow's family since childhood. He joined Bonnie and Clyde on Christmas Eve of 1932 at the age of 16, and the 3 left Dallas that night. The next day, Jones and Barrow murdered Doyle Johnson, a young family man, while stealing his car. Barrow also killed the Tarrant County Deputy Malcolm Davis on January the 6th of 1933, when he, Parker, and Jones wandered into a police trap set for another criminal. And at this point, the gang had murdered 5 people.
Yeah, and that's oftentimes murderers who were eventually brought to justice. 5 is like 5 or less is like the career of a violent criminal. But they did a bit more than that.
Yes, and and I also want to point out that this is, that there are these are serial killers. Maybe it's not a serial killer in the way that we tend to think of serial killers, but these are serial killers.
Yeah, these are, they have similar minds as to the two armed robbers in South Florida who got into that famous FBI shootout.
Oh, Ma Barker.
Oh, no! This was during the 80s.
Oh,
This is during the 80s. It's like say similar minds, okay, and it's like the FBI agent in charge uh, had commented about them impressing the seriousness of this felony stop that they were attempting. Was that they, be ready, these they like to shoot.
right.
Okay,
Okay.
so criminals like this, it's not all necessity when they use their guns to shoot people. They're enjoying it. Bonnie and Clyde enjoyed shooting people.
Yeah, I believe they
Okay,
enjoyed
so
it
that
too.
was all part of it. I'm not going out on a limb here to say that Bonnie and Clyde enjoyed shooting people. They really did. They
Right.
didn't. They did not exactly look for, look for ways not to shoot.
Right.
No. It was all part of their lifestyle.
You're right. You're right. On March the 22nd of 1933, Clyde's brother Buck was granted a full pardon and released from prison. He and his wife Blanche lived with Bonnie Clyde and Jones in a temporary hideout at 3347 and a half Oak Ridge Drive in Joplin, Missouri. According to family sources, Buck and Blanche were there to visit, and they attempted to persuade Clyde to surrender to law enforcement. But alas, that did not happen. The group ran alcohol fueled card games late into the night in the quiet neighborhood. Blanche recalled they bought a case of beer a day, and the men came and went noisily at all hours, and Clyde even accidentally fired a BAR in the apartment while cleaning it.
Oh my! Oh, forgot around in the chamber.
Mm-hmm.
Forgot to check it.
Now, nobody ever reported anything to law enforcement, however. So,
well, back then, especially, you hear one round go off, and then you just, it's just they think, that's just an accident, or a car backfire.
right.
Not necessarily, and then no one, no one reports being shot.
Mm-hmm.
So, not like it is today.
No. Now, police did suspect that there were bootleggers living at that address. The Barrow brothers and Jones opened fire, killing Detective Henry L. McGinnis outright, and they also fatally wounded Constable J.W. Harriman, and Bonnie Parker opened fire with a BAR as the others fled, which forced a highway patrol sergeant G.B. Collar to duck behind a large oak tree. The 30 caliber bullets from the BAR struck the tree and forced wood splinters into the sergeant's face. Parker got into the car with the others, and they pulled Blanche into the car from the street. The surviving officers later testified they had fired only 14 rounds in the conflict. One of the bullets did hit Jones on his side, one struck Clyde but was deflected by a suit coat button, and another one grazed Buck after ricocheting off a wall. So this was another shootout they had with law enforcement.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the group, while they did escape, they left behind most of their possessions. And this was Buck's 3-week-old parole papers.
Okay. Didn't waste any time.
No. A handwritten poem by Bonnie. A large arsenal of weapons. So most of the weapons that they had stolen already or acquired or bought were left behind during this time. Okay. And They also left a camera with several rolls of undeveloped film. Police developed the film at the Joplin Globe, and the roll of film revealed photos of Bonnie and Clyde and Jones posing and pointing weapons at one another. The Globe sent the poem and the photos out over the news wire, including the photo of Bonnie Parker clenching a cigar in her teeth and a pistol in her hand. And from this moment on, the Barrow Gang became front page news throughout America.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's that sensationalism we were talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, that really sold newspapers.
It really did.
Yeah.
It really did.
This wasn't a radio show. This was the real deal, and people wanted to read about it, and people wanted to see those pictures for sure.
Yes, they did. Now, at this point, the group went from Texas to Minnesota for the next 3 months. They kidnapped Dillard Darby and Sophia Stone in Ruston, Louisiana, in the course of stealing Darby's car. And this was one of several events between 1932 and 1934 in which they kidnapped police officers or robbery victims. Now, they usually released their hostages, but they would do it far from home. But sometimes they would give them money to help them return. Isn't that nice?
I think they were trying to. It's like an old world ancient tactic. It's similar to the tactic of leaving a few people alive to tell your tale.
Oh, like natural born killers, yeah.
Yeah. So they wanted people to talk about them.
They did.
They enjoyed the sensationalism.
Well, or did they? Because while the photos entertained the public, the gang was desperate and upset. This is an account by Blanche, okay? Because she did write a memoir while imprisoned in the late 1930s, okay? Because of their notoriety, their daily lives were difficult. They were trying to avoid being captured, right? So they couldn't go into restaurants. They couldn't check into motels. They had to resort to cooking by campfire. They bathed in cold streams. And they often slept in the car. And 5 people sleeping in a car is no fun. This led to a lot of arguing. Okay? Because you're in close proximity. You can't get a break from these people. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So the public might have loved it, but the gang, maybe not. Okay? Yeah, we will be back after this quick break. So there was one day on June the 10th, when Clyde Barrow failed to see warning signs at a bridge under construction. Jones and Parker were also in the car, and they were near Wellington, Texas. The car flipped into a ravine, and sources disagree on whether there was a gasoline fire or if Bonnie Parker was doused with acid from the car's battery under the floorboards, but either way, she sustained third-degree burns up her right leg. They were so severe that the muscles contracted and caused the leg to draw up. She was burned so badly that the gang thought that she would die. The hide on her right leg was completely gone from her hip to her ankle, and they could see the bone in some places. It's pretty vicious injury that she had sustained. She could hardly walk. She either hopped or she was carried. And they initially they got help from a nearby farm, from a nearby family farm. Then they kidnapped a Collinsworth County sheriff named George Corey and city marshal Paul Hardy, and left the two of them handcuffed to a bar. And they left the two of them handcuffed to a tree outside of Eric, Oklahoma. The three then rendezvoused. How do you say that?
Rendezvous.
Okay,
rendezvoused.
Yeah, rendezvous. Thank you. With Buck and Blanche, and hid in a tourist court near Fort Smith, Arkansas. They nursed Parker's burns as best they could, and Buck and Jones bungled a robbery, and murdered a town marshal named Henry D. Humphrey in Alma, Arkansas. And of course, this meant that the criminals had to flee again, despite Bonnie Parker's severe injuries. In July of 1933, the gang went into the Red Cross Tourist Court south of Platte City, Missouri. The rental had 2 brick cabins joined by garages, and the gang rented both. Near the tourist court was the Red Crown Tavern, a popular restaurant amongst Missouri highway patrolmen. Blanche registered the party as 3 guests, but the owner, Neil Hauser, could see 5 people getting out of the car, and he noticed that the driver backed into the garage for a quick getaway. And Blanche paid for their cabins with coins rather than dollar bills, and she did the same thing later when she noticeably bought 5 dinners and 5 beers. The next day, Hauser noticed that his guests had taped newspapers over the windows of their cabin. And again, Blanche, who was apparently the person getting the meals and the beers, was still paying with coins, and she was buying 5 of each. Okay, so they weren't really being very discreet here at all. Okay, and as a matter of fact, Blanche's outfit of Jodhpur riding breeches, which, pants, okay, was so unusual that eyewitnesses still remembered them 40 years later.
Yeah, Jodhpurs back then were typical of European military uniforms, especially namely officers.
Right, but it's also a woman wearing pants in this era was
unusual, that's true, right? and military style, European military style trousers at that. Yeah.
Right. So all of this activity, okay, caused Neil Hauser to contact Captain William Baxter of the Highway Patrol about this group. And at this point, Barrow and Jones went into town to purchase bandages, crackers, cheese, and atropine sulfate, which is a drug to treat Bonnie's leg.
Yeah.
Okay, the druggist contacted Sheriff Holt Coffey, who put the cabins under surveillance. Now, law enforcement in Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas had sent out an alert to watch for people seeking, drugs for injuries.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, at this point, the sheriff contacted Captain Baxter, who called for reinforcements from Kansas City, and they included an armored car. Sheriff Coffey led a group of officers towards the cabins at 11 p.m., and they were armed with Thompson submachine guns. And wouldn't you know it, another gunfight ensued. The 45 caliber Thompsons were no match for Barrow's 30 caliber BAR, and this is the one that you mentioned earlier, Brian, that was stolen from a National Guard armory at Enid, Oklahoma. The gang escaped when a bullet short-circuited the horn on the armored car, and the police officers mistook it for a ceasefire signal, and they did not they did not pursue the retreating vehicle.
Oh, yeah, miscommunication can mess things up in a tactical situation, or failure to communicate. Just keep in mind, the Thompson submachine gun, it fires, a 45 caliber pistol bullet, which is actually at a slow velocity. It's like under 900 feet per second. Coming out of like an 11-inch barrel. Right. Submachine gun up against these 30-06, deer killing rifle rounds.
Right. From
the BAR, which, at the time, the United States military, for the service rifles as well as the machine squad automatic weapons like a BAR, machine guns, it was all oriented towards strictly killing, not wounding the enemy. That was before the United States military decided to shrink the size of their ammunition to smaller rounds of ammo in favor of having more rounds of ammo and the ability to maim and wound versus, pure killing power,
Right. Well, speaking of maiming and wounding, even though they had invaded law enforcement once again, Buck had been wounded by a bullet that blasted a large hole in the bone of his forehead and exposed his brain. And Blanche was nearly blinded in both eyes by glass fragments.
Yeah, one of the forgotten elements of a firefight and warfare is essentially, shrapnel. Yeah. Yep. Secondary fragments caused by, let's say, explosive blasts or even gunfire.
Right.
Which are every bit as capable of wounding you.
Yes.
As a bullet.
And it was at this point that the Barrow Gang camped at an abandoned amusement park near Dexter, Iowa on July the 24th. Buck was sometimes semi-conscious and he even talked and ate, but his massive head wound and loss of blood were so severe that Barrow and Jones dug a grave for him, even though he didn't die yet. Okay, but they were worried that he would die. Now, local residents noticed them and reported the activity to law enforcement, and law enforcement determined that they were the Barrow Gang. Local police officers and approximately 100 spectators surrounded the group, and the Barrow Gang came under fire. Barrow, Parker, and Jones escaped on foot. Buck was shot in the back, and he and Blanche were captured by the officers. Buck did die of his head wound and pneumonia after surgery 5 days later at King's Daughters Hospital in Perry, Iowa.
Well, dead or in jail.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. The story of any violent criminal. That's where it goes. You end up dead or in jail. Yeah. Just the same. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Right. Or my favorite, fuck around and find out. Now, for the next 6 weeks, the remaining perpetrators ranged far afield from their usual area of operations, west to Colorado, north to Minnesota, southeast to Mississippi. Yet, they continued to commit armed robberies. They restocked their arsenal when Barrow and Jones robbed an armory at Platteville, Illinois, on August the 20th, and they acquired 3 BARs, handguns, and a large quantity of ammunition. By early September, the gang risked a run to Dallas to see their families for the first time in 4 months. Jones parted company with them and went to Houston, where his mother had moved. And that's where he was arrested without incident.
Oh, yeah, another tidbit on the Browning designed BAR, which is also manufactured by Colt. Keep in mind, later on in World War II, the BAR would help the United States Marine Corps beat the Japanese forces in the Pacific.
Ah, okay.
But yeah, that was short of the short of the 50 caliber and Browning 30 caliber belt fit machine guns, yeah, the BARs were pretty serious firepower.
So for those of you keeping score at home, this was Buck was dead, Blanche was arrested, and Jones was also arrested, which pretty much just left Bonnie and Clyde. Okay.
Yep, the ones you mainly hear about.
The ones that you mainly hear about.
Because they were the last one standing.
Well,
more specifically sitting. But we'll get to that in a bit.
Well, through the autumn, Clyde Barrow committed several more robberies with some local accomplices.
Yeah. Okay. Now keep in mind this was their job. This is how they earn their money, just robbing people, robbing institutions. Yes.
Yes. And Bonnie's injuries were tended to by both his family and her family. So she was essentially on bed rest and being hidden away in the family home.
Okay. Yeah, now she is on light duty. Mm-hmm. Yeah, light duty. Don't lift a weapon over 5 pounds.
On November 22nd, they narrowly evaded arrest yet again while trying to meet with family members near Sowers, Texas. Dallas Sheriff Smoot Schmid, Deputy Bob Alkern, and Deputy Ted Hinton lay in wait nearby. As Barrow drove up, he sensed a trap and drove past his family's car, at which point Schmid and his deputies stood up and opened fire with machine guns and a BAR. The family members in the crossfire were not hit, but a BAR bullet passed through the car, striking the legs of both Barrow and Parker, who again escaped later that night.
Yeah, very likely just passed through muscle tissue.
Yeah.
That happens sometimes with rifle bullets.
On November 28th, a Dallas grand jury delivered a murder indictment against Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow for the killing in January that year, nearly 10 months earlier, of Tarrant County Deputy Malcolm Davis, and this would be Bonnie Parker's first warrant for murder. On January the 16th, 1934, Clyde Barrow orchestrated the escape of inmates in the Easton breakout. The brazen raid generated negative publicity for Texas, and Barrow seemed to have achieved what historian Phillips suggested was his overriding goal: revenge on the Texas Department of Corrections. During the raid, one of the gang members, Joe Palmer, shot Major Joe Crescent, who died a few days later in the hospital, and this attack attracted the full power of the Texas and federal government. The full power of Texas law enforcement and federal governments to the manhunt for Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker. So this is their big break.
Mm-hmm.
Prison Chief Lee Simmons reportedly promised him that all persons involved in the breakout would be hunted down and killed. All of them eventually were, except for one inmate who preserved his life by turning on the gang, and he helped set up the ambush of Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker. And that person's name was Henry Methvin. The Texas Department of Corrections contacted former Texas Ranger Captain Frank Hammer and persuaded him to hunt down the Barrow gang. He was retired, but his commission had not expired. He accepted the assignment as a Texas Highway Patrol officer, secondarily assigned to the prison system as a special investigator, and he was given the specific task of taking down the Barrow gang. And we're going to stop here for a quick break. By May of 1934, Clyde Barrow had 16 warrants for multiple counts of robbery, auto theft, escape, assault, and murder in 4 states. Hammer, who had begun tracking the gang on February the 12th, led the law enforcement posse. He studied the gang's movements and found that they swung in a circle, skirting the edges of 5 Midwestern states, which exploited the state line rule. And this rule prevented officers from pursuing a fugitive into another jurisdiction. And Barrow was consistent in his movements, and Hammer noticed that the gang's travels centered on family visits, and they were due to see gang member Henry Methvin's family in Louisiana. Unbeknownst to Hammer, Clyde Barrow had designated that particular residence as a rendezvous in case the gang were separated. Hammer's posse was composed of 6 men. Texas officers Hammer, Hinton, Alkern, and B.M. Manigault, and Louisiana officers Henderson Jordan and Prentice Morrell Oakley. On May the 21st, the 4 law enforcement officers from Texas were in Shreveport, and this is when they found out that Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker were planning to visit Bienville Parish that evening. The full posse set up an ambush along the Louisiana State Highway 154 south of Gibbsland towards Sales. Hinton recounted that the lawmen were in place by 9 p.m. and waited through the whole of the next day, May 22nd, with no sign of the perpetrators.
Yeah, that's typically what happens when you set up an ambush, is you wait and wait and wait. It's boring as all heck and nobody comes.
Well, not in this case.
Yeah.
At approximately 9:15 a.m. on May 23rd, the posse was still concealed in the bushes, and they were almost ready to give up when they heard a vehicle approaching at high speed. And this vehicle was proven to be the Ford V8 driven by Clyde Barrow. The six lawmen opened fire while the vehicle was still moving. Oakley fired first, and this was possibly before he had any official order to do so. Barrow was shot in the head and he died instantly from Oakley's first shot, and it was reported they heard Bonnie Parker scream. The officers fired about 130 rounds, emptying each of their weapons into the car. And the two had survived several bullet wounds in the past. But on this day, any one of these wounds could have been the cause of their deaths.
Oh, especially the first one, considering I believe that was a Remington Model 8, which was a 30-06 rifle. 30-06, I mean, that's a deer killer.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And you won't be surprised to learn this, Brian, but those officers were deafened by all that gunfire.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, the 30-06 is vastly more powerful than the 5.56 millimeter, 223 diameter caliber round that I used in my M16 in the Marine Corps. A lot louder, a lot more powerful. I can remember, like, after the third round, usually after the third round fired from my M16 without hearing protection, my ears were already popped.
Right.
Sounds like you got a tire blowout right next to your ear. So 30-06 is much more intense. Much more intense than that.
Yes. Now, in the vehicle, there was an arsenal of weapons discovered. This was stolen automatic rifles, sawed-off semi-automatic shotguns, assorted handguns, and several thousand rounds of ammunition, along with 15 sets of license plates from various states.
Yeah, there's like 3,000 rounds of assorted ammunition.
Oh, you have the facts right there. Huh?
Yeah, plus, get this, 120 round BAR magazines.
Wow.
Okay. Let's imagine just one of these magazines, 20 rounds of 30-06 BAR that you could fire in bursts. Okay. Right. Which, if you're practiced with it, you can get these short bursts very accurate, very powerful here. See, so it was like a total of 16 firearms, 3 of these full auto, BARs. Okay. In the configuration similar to the Colt Monitor, with the short barrel. Okay. 20 gauge Remington 1100 semi-auto, okay, with barrel cut down for concealability, okay, mind you. Now, cutting the barrel on a shotgun just doesn't improve the ballistics; it just makes it concealable and handy, easy to work corners with. That was Bonnie's favorite, was the 20 gauge semi-auto Remington shotgun. Okay, a 10 gauge model 1901 lever action. Sawed off. Okay, keep in mind now, the lower the gauge is more powerful. 10 gauge more powerful than 12 gauge, by the way. Okay. A 32 caliber 1903 Colt automatic pistol. Okay, now these were very popular for self-defense because they were semi-automatic and they were easy to shoot, and they were actually very reliable with the 32 caliber ammo, previously popular in Europe. Okay. It was like later on you have your Walther PPK in Europe in the 32 caliber, but this was the American favorite here in 32, the Colt 1903. The ubiquitous for most of the 20th century, Colt Detective 6-shot 38 revolver. Okay. The steel frame version of it, whereas like later on Lee Harvey Oswald would get caught with the Colt Cobra, which is the lightweight alloy frame version of it. Okay. Your Colt 25 caliber, mini pistol, okay, which could fit into a vest pocket, nicknamed vest pocket, okay, pistol. A Colt 1909 45 caliber revolver, okay, saw service in World War I and World War II, and 7, okay, semi-automatic Colt M1911 45 pistols.
That was a lot of guns.
7 of those, okay?
That's a lot of guns.
So with the handguns, you see a recurring theme. They loved Colt handguns. from 25 caliber all the way up to 45. You know. Yep.
Okay. Well, word of the deaths quickly got around, and a crowd gathered at the spot. And this crowd, well, one woman cut off bloody locks of Parker's hair and pieces from her dress and sold them as souvenirs. They also caught a man trying to cut off Clyde Barrow's trigger finger. Okay. Now, other souvenirs such as shell casings, slivers of glass from the shattered car windows, bloody pieces of clothing, and the garments from Bonnie and Clyde. Somebody tried to cut off Clyde's left ear as well. I mean, you want to talk about just ugh. So,
with a piece of clothing that kind of reminds me of like, it's like sometimes like some packs of sports cards, for football cards.
Mm-hmm.
Every now and then they would be like these chase cards that would only appear one every few cases, and the card would actually have like a small piece of a tiny piece of a game worn jersey from the player whose card it would be.
I remember that. Yeah.
You know, so
do they still make those?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. They still do that, but of course this is not as perverted as what was just mentioned. You know?
That's true, because the player voluntarily gave it up.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So the Ford car with the dead body still inside was towed to the Conger Furniture Store and Funeral Parlor in downtown Arcadia, Louisiana. The embalming was done in a small preparation room in the back of the furniture store, since apparently at the time it was common for furniture stores and undertakers to share the same space. And the undertaker had a difficult time embalming the bodies because of the amount of bullet holes.
Yeah, speaking of bullet holes, essentially it's like the law enforcement who engaged them in this instance, they fired off all of their rifle ammunition into the car. Then they all picked up shotguns, fired off all of their shotgun ammunition into the car, and then pulled pistols.
Right.
And assaulted the vehicle with their pistols afterwards. So it was something like, what was 154 bullet holes in the car, something like that.
Now the population of this Louisiana town swelled from 2,000 to 12,000 within hours. Spectators arrived by train, horseback, buggy, and plane. Beer that normally sold for 15 cents in a bottle was raised to 25 cents, and sandwiches quickly sold out. Now, Barrow specifically had been shot in the head by a 35 Remington Model 8, which I believe you did mention, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And his father, Clyde Barrow's father, identified his son's body and then just wept in a rocking chair in the furniture section, which, it is still sad when you think about how he didn't want his son to end up like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's still your family. I mean, this is why families, that visit people in jail, because it's, you may not love what your family member did, breaking the law, but you still love them, so you visit them. You don't stop caring about them just because they're living a life of crime.
Right.
Right.
So, more than 20,000 people attended Bonnie Parker's funeral.
Yeah, that's some of the people who romanticized the whole deal. Apparently, were probably most of the people in attendance.
Yes, and
that's state funeral level attendance.
The largest floral tribute was sent by a group of Dallas City newsboys, as the sudden end of Bonnie and Clyde sold 500,000 newspapers in Dallas alone.
And that was their last chance of publicity. was
Yes.
covering the funeral and sending flowers to the funeral. I mean, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so you definitely know that the journalists who covered them, their activities romanticized them as well.
Yes. And Bonnie Parker was buried initially in the Fish Trap Cemetery, although in 1945 her body was moved to the New Crown Hill Cemetery in Dallas.
Where
Thousands,
she's from, right?
yes, where she's from.
Yeah.
Thousands of people gathered outside both Dallas funeral homes hoping for a chance to view the bodies. Clyde Barrow's private funeral was held at sunset on May the 25th, and he was buried in Western Heights Cemetery in Dallas next to his brother Marvin. The Barrow brothers share a single granite marker with their names on it and an epitaph selected by Clyde, which is gone but not forgotten. And indeed, we still have not forgotten Bonnie and Clyde.
No, we sure hadn't. And one of the this Dallas deputy sheriff who was involved in the ambush, was brought along by law enforcement because he didn't forget them. In fact, he grew up
Mm-hmm.
around Clyde, and he had known Bonnie from when she worked as a waitress in a restaurant as a teenager.
Right.
Yeah, so he certainly didn't forget them. And he was, remember, during the confrontation, his primary firearm was a Colt Monitor variation of the VAR.
Right.
Borrowed from the National Guard. Borrowed, not stolen from the National Guard. So
Yeah.
the irony there, National Guard BARs on both sides of this firefight.
Yes. Now the vehicle that they were killed in is still on display today. It's in the Prim Casino in Prim, Nevada. Okay. And as a point of interest, Clyde Barrow did write a letter to Henry Ford expressing his admiration for the V8 and said that it was a great car for escaping law enforcement in.
Yeah, and now the V8 engine was also great for stopping pistol bullets and shotgun pellets or slugs as well. And if Colonel Samuel Colt had been still around, not a real colonel, that was just the title he gave himself, he would have probably written a letter to Samuel Colt as well, thanking him for inventing the 45. Yeah, the 45 caliber. Yeah.
Well, what are your final thoughts, babe?
Something very intriguing, and of course, violent criminals who have crime sprees like this are, of course, keep in mind they're actually rare. Okay, for these crime sprees to go on that long, or for them to do as much as they did, the number of shootouts they had with law enforcement, the number of successful armed robberies and burglaries they undertook. And it's fascinating from several aspects. We just touched upon two of the aspects, like the subject of firearms.
Mm-hmm.
Part of they left their mark on firearms history. Okay.
Louisiana history, Texas
history, Texas history,
criminal history.
Yeah, the history of Ford vehicles.
Yeah, the history of Ford vehicles.
Yeah, and it's it's a story that will be told for the duration of mankind on this planet. But it ends the same way as pretty much all other criminal histories. They spent time in jail and they ended up dead.
They ended up dead.
Yeah.
They did not have, and I would imagine this was not a nice life that they had together either. Yeah, this was not a nice, quiet life that they had. They didn't have the pleasures of making a home together. They weren't really able to go out to eat. They weren't able to go out on dates.
It was a very rough lifestyle they led that was similar to a frontier lifestyle.
Yes.
And their lifestyle was actually more violent than the Western frontier.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the level, it's gunfighters in the Wild West are, well, no one was a gunfighter by profession. Okay. You know, it's like you get into one shootout in the Wild West and you're considered a gunfighter. Okay. But they got involved in a lot more than the
And
gunfighters of the West did.
and those weapons that they used were a lot more deadly than the guns from the Wild West too. I mean, you didn't have Browning automatic rifles. Right.
Back then, typically the king of any Wild West shootout would be
the Colt Peacemaker.
Well, as far as handguns go, yes. Okay. You know, God God made man, Samuel Colt made man equal. Okay.
Right.
You know, 45 long Colts, a very, very potent pistol round even to this day. But you know, your Winchester lever action rifles,
right,
you could say were the assault rifles of the West. You know, as these were powerful, you know, 30 caliber, you know, once again, a deer caliber. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the power of a 30 is within the ballpark of a 30-06, not as powerful though, but, you know, strong enough to, you take someone down quickly. Like this instance where this marshal served this warrant on this guy and 4 of his cousins, you know, got involved. And despite the fact that they all got their shots off first, this marshal took down all 5 of them with one well-aimed shot each from a Winchester lever action rifle.
Right.
He made his shots count.
Right. Well, my final thoughts are essentially, if you are going to date a bad boy, don't date a bad boy. Don't date a bad boy. I know that they look cute. I know that they're attractive, and they'll probably show you things you've never seen before. But it's probably not going to end well.
Yeah, it's gonna end like you're lighting a short fuse. And boom.
Yes, it's going to end in a boom. And if you do date a bad boy, don't do it for long.
No,
don't get addicted to the bad boy.
Leave that at high school.
Yeah, leave that. Yeah, or even college.
Yeah.
Or your first couple of years of college. And, you know, my advice, especially to young women out there who might be listening to this, focus on yourself. Focus on yourself. You know, do what you want to do because you want to do it. Not because you got caught up in something bad because of somebody else.
Yes, empower yourself.
Yes, whatever that means to you, unless it means breaking the law, don't do that. Right?
Yes.
All right, so that is going to finish it for us here today, dear listeners. We thank you so much for tuning in and for spending some time with us. We know that this was a bit of a longer episode, but we are trying to do longer episodes as long as we can do long episodes for. And end it on a bad joke. It's fine.
Yeah.
And in our next episode, which will be again on March the 2nd, we're going to be talking about another colorful politician from our state's history. We're going to be talking about Huey P. Long and his murder.
Ah, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So until then, dear listeners, be safe, be kind. Remember that we're all human beings, and don't park next to vans.
If it's dark, it's dangerous, and it does not feel safe. Don't be there in the first place, especially during Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
And if you are questioned by law enforcement in an official capacity, and you are not the witness or the victim of a crime, be sure to lawyer up. And also, I want to add, don't point guns at people as a joke, and on top of that, don't do it and photograph yourselves doing it.
That's very true. Just like Bonnie and Clyde did. They photographed themselves doing it as a joke.
Yeah, you could say that was their their early version of like YouTube
You're
or
right.
TikTok stupidity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Bye. Goodbye.
Good night. Happy Mardi Gras.
Happy Mardi Gras. Eat some king cake. Be good.